Okay, just let me get my notes pulled back up. This is what I get for minimizing them in the first place. Howdy, Tiger. Oops, that is not what I meant to do. I meant to be in Photoshop. And let me see if I can find general brushes. And this is the last one for this course. Generally across most programs, you have pizza, soda, and a lesson. Best night. Perfect. Generally, the brushes you get are something similar to this, regardless of the program. You'll have your hard round, soft round. Right now, we're gonna go for a hard round, and I'm just gonna kind of quickly explain the technicalities behind a brush and what it does. Um, so what a brush does is every time you click, it makes one stamp of itself. So this image that you see here with the circle, it's making one stamp of that circle. And then your settings are defining how those stamps come together and form a stroke. So generally up here is going to be your main brush settings. You're going to have opacity and flow are going to be your two major ones. Opacity is like if you were on a layer opacity and you changed it to make it dimmer. So if I have a brush, let me create a new layer so I'm not working on my line art. And let's do black. So if you have brush set to opacity, it's going to be 100%. If you drop it down, let's say halfway, in order to get that same blackness, you have to go over it. It keeps adding 50% more, 50% more. So I think that's, the math is escaping me. It's like four brush strokes or something will eventually get you to. And then if you go lower, it's even more faded. But you can see where it overlaps. Uh, it's going to start darkening where it overlaps because it's multiplying that opacity. Uh, your flow is a little bit different. It's how your opacity on the edges start out. So if I put my flow down, it should start out light, and every stamp it's supposed to get darker, but I'm not quite seeing. You can kind of see it on the edges here. That's because I have my opacity low. There we go. So you can see it right there. If I turn my spacing up, you'll really see it. So they get darker up to 42%. I generally use flow to control my mixing. I will use a 13% flow. And then that's how you get a gradual buildup. Let me turn that spacing back off. So those are the two quickest, easiest ways to control your brush. Some applications and brushes also have smoothing, and what smoothing does, I don't think any of these that come with it have it built in. I don't think so. What smoothing does is it's going to estimate your curve, and then it's going to smooth that out based on your percentage. And you'll see it's got a pulled string mode, so it'll say, okay, imagine your 2 points are a string, or stroke catch-up means there'll be a little bit of a delay in your stroke, and then it'll show you exactly what it means. Catch-up on stroke end just means it gets faster by the time you let go. and then adjust for zoom. Depends on how closely you're zoomed in, because if you're zoomed way into here, your lines might not be or might not look as neat as they do when you're out here. Or vice versa. Sorry, if you make your nice perfectly, or if your line's all jagged here, it'll smooth out when you zoom out. But if it's assuming something completely different when you're zoomed in. And that leads us into our brush settings, which is all over here. So brush settings, you'll see your brush tip. This is what the end of your brush looks like. Right now I'm just going to leave it on the hard round. And your brush tip shape is your primary, this is what how you make your brushes start doing what you want them to do. So spacing is exactly kind of how it sounds. It's the spaces between the steps that you have. So if I set it like this, it's going to create an almost pearl-like effect. Hardness, this is that blur. So you can create a little fairy light effect going on. You want to make that a light color. Or if you want a really smooth stroke, you drop your spacing. I believe it's set to 10? 5. It's set to 5 automatically. I usually crank it right down to 1. So my strokes are as smooth as possible. Some brushes with a texture will require some spacing in between to be able to see the texture, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Your flip X and your flip Y. So if I go to one of these brushes, my good old chalk brush, my bestest friend ever, it's got a shape to it that's a little bit more than a circle, but if I hit flip X, it's going to flip it the opposite way on the X-axis. Flip Y flips it the opposite way on the Y-axis. And then we've also got this little circle with an arrow. So this is the angle at which your brush is. And you can also say, hey, I want to flatten it out some. And you can make it into more of a pen. And you can do the same thing with a hard round if you want. You can flatten it out, tilt it a little bit to the side, and now we've got a calligraphy pen. I don't think I left myself enough space. Did not. So right off the bat, you can do quite a few things with just your basic brush. Um, Generally, what I recommend for newer artists is pick 1 or 2 brushes and just get the hang of those, and then everything will translate across. You don't need a mass amount of fancy brushes to do what you want, but we can start editing these to kind of make them work for us as opposed to us working for them. So right below our brush tip shape, we're going to have our shape dynamics. Now, when you see jitter, jitter is just Photoshop speak for randomness. I don't know if GIMP or Psy uses a different terminology, but it just means random. So Psy's randomness would be, okay, throughout the stroke, I want it to be, actually, let me turn my spacing back down to 1, go back to shape dynamics. If I want it to be more random, you can set your minimum diameter, so it won't go anywhere lower than 42%. You can set the control to fade, so it'll automatically fade the stroke in size. And let's bring that back to 0. And then 25 is just the number of steps it takes to fade to 0. So if I set this to 500 because of the size I'm working at, you can set it that way. You also have pen pressure, so for if you're using a tablet, if you press lightly, it's going to be thinner, and then when you press hard, it's going to get thicker, and you can thin it down, and it goes based on your control. Oops. You can set it to pen tilt. I don't actually know if my tablet supports. Oh, it does support that. Some tablets don't have a gyro built into the pen, so that would be literally how you tilt your pen, is how it's going to adjust its size. Oh, exclamation mark. That means my tablet actually doesn't support that and it's just picking it at random. Cool. So that wasn't working the way it wanted to. And you can go by stylus wheel. So if you have Wacom makes a airbrush tablet pen. It's last I had looked, it's $100. And it's got a little wheel on it to simulate an actual airbrush. And for anyone who's used an airbrush, that's about legit. Takes a lot of practice to get used to. I typically have mine set to pen pressure. I'm going to turn that off for now, just to... Now, angle, I'm going to have to turn this into a shape in order to show you the angle. So angle jitter will randomize the angle that it's at, because angle random. So you can create some interesting effects with that. You can have it set to pen tilt. You'll see that there's a couple extra options. And if you ever see that exclamation mark, pen pressure. So if I'm going light, it's going to try to go in random directions. I don't have the pen tilt or stylus wheel. Rotation says I don't have that either. So that's unfortunate. I can't show you that one. My old tablet did used to have that. So initial direction will mean whichever direction, as soon as you press down and point, it's going to go in that direction. And sometimes you have to tweak this a little bit to get it to go face the direction you want it to go. And then direction is just whichever direction you're pointed at as you make your stroke. Whereas initial direction was just whichever direction you started moving, and then it's going to try to keep the angle of that brush the same. You can turn that off. So roundness jitter, this will make it less round or more round, which is this shape that we were messing with here. So you can, again, set it to fade. We'll set it to something visible, which is, we'll say 500 steps. And let's make this round again. Set my roundness jitter to fade. Say 500 steps. So as you go, you see it gets a little bit more and more and more flat. You can tell it the minimum roundness, so I could say 1, and it will get to pancake flat. It will be one single stroke, and you'll see you get some funniness at the edges there. You can again do your pen pressure. So depending on how lightly, as I'm lightening up the pressure, it's getting more and more flat. Or if you just want it to be all over the place, you can set the roundness randomness, and it's going to just randomize when and where. So that's your shapes. Now your scattering is how it's going to take each stamp of the brush and it's just going to randomly spread it around. So you can do x-axis, sorry, it does y-axis off the bat. You could do x and y, and you'll see how it starts to create a bubbly effect. Now if I go and I take my spacing and I spread that out a little bit, it should start, oh, I need to go a little bit more. And now it's going to start putting dots around where I'm stroking my brush. You can tell it how many steps you want it to do per time you tap your tablet pen to the tablet. So I have 3, so you see when I pushed once, it gave me 3 dots and scattered around. 3, 3. Tell it to do a whole bunch. And then count jitter is, again, that count randomness. So now it's just going to pick a random number up to 6. And you can set that control as well to fade out. So texture is, and you'll see I have this transfer turned on, and it's controlling my opacity via pen pressure. I don't normally do that. I normally take my flow and control that with my pen pressure, because I'm not the biggest fan of using opacity. It takes a little bit more work to make that work for me, so I tend to use flow instead. But that will turn off your it will turn off your pen overriding these settings. So texture. So texture adds a texture out of any of these into your brush stamp. And let's turn my spacing down. Back down. It gives you the option to invert it, so it'll. Is that gonna work for me? Or do I have to have black? Can't remember. You can. There we go. You can set it to multiply. So let's do a color and see if that works. No? Why is it not working for me? I probably need a bigger. Normally, I can get it to work. I might need to put a different brush on. But it tries to pretend as if you're painting on that canvas. Let me turn off my transfer. That might be what's messing it up. Normally, oh, there we go. Okay, so I had my brightness set too high. That's what happened. There we go. So now it's putting a canvas-like effect behind my paintbrush. And I could set it to color dodge instead. Which that's not going to work as nice as multiply. And you can really adjust your brightness down. Now you'll see it doesn't, it only overlaps the texture in that certain spot. It's because it's pretending that the entire canvas is already, or your texture is already on there, and you're just brushing over top of it. I don't know why I keep throwing it tight. Never, doesn't seem to work for me. And eventually you'll fill up all the blank spaces. Between the space of your texture. And you can set your scale lower, make it look a little bit more natural. And then if you want, you can start messing with your hardness. And then depth jitter is pretending it's in its real life paint. It's going to randomize how thick your paint goes on in different spaces. You'll see how invert it takes the white spots, makes them dark, takes the dark spots, makes them white. Just gives you a slightly different texture. We can do this guy. Let me make my brush size bigger, scale this up. So this is more of a gauze canvas effect. Excuse you while you go witchcraft every time I push a button. Yeah, no, it's learning your tools. A lot of people think brushes are super complicated, but they're really not. Once you know kind of what they do, how to predict them, what you might need to make your brush work. Um, Now, dual brush, I'm going to set it to something obscure. Um, Let me see if I've got it. Do I have it in special effects brushes? I know I've got something around here somewhere that's a shape. Do I not like have a leaf? Oh, there's a leaf. Okay. Allow me to turn off all of these settings right off the bat. And I'm going to set my spacing so that way you can see the leaf stamps separate from each other. Now you'll see when I make it too large, the edges of the brush start pixelizing. So what dual brush does is it takes your main brush and that becomes your shape, and then it's going to put whichever other brush you select, that is going to be inside the cutout. So let's do spots. So I have this spotted brush tip, and this spotted brush tip is just going to be inside that. And here you can adjust how it shows up. Once you get to a certain size, it starts freaking out because it's bigger than the other brush. I could set my spacing on that individually. I can set it to scatter. And let's set count up a little bit more. Oh. Let's turn those off for a second, except for spacing. Oh, it's because I have my transfer turned on again. So you can see it's trying to fill up this shape, each stamp, with that other brush. Let me turn that down, see if that works a little bit better. Actually, better yet, we can always throw the leaf brush into the leaf. Oh, there's another leaf brush. So you see it's trying to fill up with this brush. It's trying to fill up the other brush based on how hard you're pushing, because it seems to want to kick my transfer on. Yeah, so it's my opacity is going on via. Trying to find a cool looking brush that we can throw in there. You can see it blacks out the brushes you can't use. So when I click on one of these, it's actually taking the settings from that particular brush shape. So that one has a directional built into it. And then it asks you, what mode do you want it? How do you want these two brushes to interact? So you can go multiply, darken, overlay. Let's go back to the brush color I was using. Yeah, it shows up a little bit better with multiply. So that's sometimes you got to mess with your settings a little bit. I can't remember what it was on color burn. Color burn tends to give you those really dark edges. But I can sit here and try to make my fill up that shape a little bit more. So that's dual brush, and then we have color dynamics. So apply per tip means per stamp, um, and then it asks you what colors would you like to use. So you can do foreground, background. Let's do leaf colors. Foreground is that, and we'll do background as that. Okay, well, how much randomness would you like to apply in the middle? So it'll go between those two color spectrums. You can tell it how much random. Now I see I've got this a little bit too. Let's do like more brown. There we go. That's more leaf-like. Oh, I see I have hue jitter on. Okay, well, that would be why some of the weirdness is going on. Turn that off. Okay, now we're just going between those two colors. So hue, really quick rundown on hue, saturation, brightness. So hue is where you are along this color wheel based on a degree. 360 degrees on either side is red. Then as you start to get into your 44 degrees is your yellow, getting into 50. Then you get your greens at 100. Your saturation, sorry, is how much color versus how little color. And if you see an exclamation mark, that usually means, hey, we're going to run into problems with this color. Let me correct you to a proper color that you can actually see or that we can actually print. And you'll see zero saturation at any color is always gray. That is your pure. There is no color added whatsoever. And then your brightness is how close to black versus how close to the edge of your color is. Let me see if I can open up my square. My square explains it a little bit better. There you go. So your brightness is along this line here, closer to white. And then as you add saturation, you get into the color. So 100% brightness at full saturation is your full color, your blinding red. And then as you go back down, it goes to black. So you can tell it to randomize the hue a little bit depending on your percentage of your degrees. So we can say, let me turn this back to something more natural. So it's going to start randomizing the hue. You'll see a purple pop up. Or you could tell it to randomize the saturation. So it's going to randomize how bright this is. Or sorry, how close to gray it is. It's technically not brightness. You see you get some more gray ones showing up in there. You can do brightness jitter, which will go along the color to black spectrum. And then purity is just how accurate to these colors it is. So if we go all the way up here, tries to add only the pure colors. We go here, you're in your gray scales. So you can set it however you'd like. So there's your main brush settings that are generally available in every program. They might not quite have dual brush or color dynamics, but you'll generally find scattering, you will find shape dynamics. And then transfer is just, yeah, your opacity jitter. What do you want to control your opacity and your flow if you don't want to man it from here? So normally I have my flow down here and I have pen pressure, so it'll go up to my 18%. Let me throw it on. I'm gonna have to reset all my brushes after I do this. Where's my, there we go. Hard round pressure sensitive. So I've got it set to 18. And let's put my control to pen pressure off. And if you like your settings and you don't want them to change, this little lock beside it will keep those settings when you click on something else. So the presets over here will not override this transfer, and they will not override this shape dynamic that I have set. Well, it wasn't supposed to. Turn you off. Pen pressure. Okay. I don't know why that's randomly changing on me, but that's it's normally why I set or I save a brush preset. So if you get your brush all hunky-dory the way that you want it to, you can click this new brush. You can name it. You can capture your brush size, include all your tool settings, and you can even include your color if you want. So it'll automatically go to these, or it'll save your color dynamics, and then it'll show up in your brush preset bar. Another tool that I just wanted to go over, this one's going to be very, very quick. Just because it's a good tool to have, is your Liquify tool. I'm not entirely sure if GIMP has it. I know Procreate has something that's very similar. Trying to think. I know. Does ClipPaint have it? I can't remember if ClipPaint has it. And you'll see it loads whatever layer I'm on, because that is the one I want to edit. So I was just on my line art here, because that will be the one that shows up. Now, because it's a white, if I remove the multiply and put it on normal, it's actually white. So when I go to liquefy it, it's going to show just the white. If you didn't have that, you can tell it to show backdrop. It's automatically set to all layers, but you can just put the background, because when it says all layers, it means the one you're also editing, which can sometimes get very confusing. For me, it doesn't really matter because the entire image is white with the drawing on it, and that's how it was saved. So I'm just going to go, I could say background behind. Oh, blend. That's new. Nope, that doesn't work. So Liquify, you have your forward warp, reconstruct, smooth, twirl clockwise, pucker, bloat, push left, freeze mask, face tool. Face tool is relatively new for, I believe it was CS6 is when they added it. I can't quite remember. Because this is a drawing, I don't think it'll find it. Yeah, it won't find it. Paintings, it usually finds faces, and you can adjust your eye size, your eye height. You can get really into it if you really want to. But for now, I'm just going to go on my view options. I'm just going to stick with the three main ones that I typically use, which is your warp. So I have my brush size, and I can hotkey to make it larger or smaller. This one will override whatever your hotkey settings are to whatever that squiggly square bracket, open and close, your brush size. So I can set it to really big, really small. You can set it to how much pressure it's applying and the density. I don't normally mess with these, but you can. So what the push or the warp tool, I'm quite sure it was push pull at some point, does is it literally moves. And you can hit Command or Control Windows Z and undo it. So if you have some minor adjustments you need to make, oh, this is facing the wrong direction, start tweaking stuff. And I generally just move in small little brush strokes because this thing can get can start getting very, very messy very quickly, as you can see. I do not recommend depending on this entirely to get things right. It looks like it might help, but it doesn't always help. You undo it straight to the base. Your pucker tool, and it's the same thing. You can use the same hotkeys to enlarge or shrink. Makes things smaller, so it's going to grab everything within this circle, make it smaller, so I can towards the middle. And bloat does the exact opposite, makes things bigger. so you can get some funky looking effects going. Or if you just go, hey, I made this one eye too big, I'm going to shrink it. Maybe not that small. This would be where you'd adjust your density if you find it's going, or your rate if you find it's going too fast. Then once you're done, you can hit OK. You'll see your adjustments go live. Now if you just want to do a small area, you can just select, let me give it a square. That'll make it happier. And warning, it will add what you did for the Liquify for the last time up here. So if you have multiple layers, you can then apply that same Liquify to the color layer below, for example. So I'm going to go down to this, so now I can zoom in and only work on this area. The downside to this is if I move stuff that's on the edges of this selection, just do that, it cuts your lines, so just be careful of that. And your brush setting is, or your brush hotkey is B. Now if you hit Shift B, you'll see it goes through a couple different options. Your pencil tool, so this one's your hard edged, and pencil might mean something slightly different in each program. But this is, yeah, your hard edged pencil. I don't typically use pencil tool in pretty much all my programs. But if it works for you, feel free to use it. And you'll see around the edges here, it's a lot sharper. Oops, wrong hotkey, this one. Because it's finding the edges of the pixels and it's just filling in pixel by pixel, instead of fading out into other pixels. Shift B again is, which one is this one? The stamp? Color replacement. I don't typically use this, but this one, and I believe it's the healing brush tool, you can usually drop a pin, and then it's just going to select that color. I have to do it on this one. There's a way to do it, I just can't quite remember how this one works. I don't typically use it. You can set it to hue, saturation, color, luminosity. And then your mixer brush. And mixer brush is one of those things that I'm just kind of getting the hang of. But it's got a lot of the similar options as your other brush tool, except this one's also got a wet option, load, mix, and then your flow. And you'll see this one has my smoothing options enabled, so I can pull string mode. And then you'll see this little stack layer. This means that it's referencing all of the colors below it. So I can mix on the top layer and it'll grab from the bottom layer. So you can see there. But I'm actually doing it on a separate layer. So if you get rid of the one below it, you sometimes see some funny stuff at the edges. So just watch out for that. Or if you change the layers below it, you might get some odd stuff. But we can use this for some shading if we want to. So this is going to be essentially what you're loading. This is your paint reservoir. So I'm telling it to load with transparent pixels, so it's not going to add any color, it's only going to mix what's there. And that's what uh, this option is clean the brush after each stroke. Otherwise it's supposed to pick up, yeah, you see it picks up the color there, and then it's going to put it down in the next time you drop your brush. See, it's over there. It's kind of like a pencil when you put your hand in it. Oop, that didn't work. Um, you can also tell it to only load with pure color. So instead of picking up the color, oh, it's supposed to reset. Okay, there we go. So now it'll only ever put down this gray, but it's smudging it into the black lines. I'm just on the standard soft round. So what wet does is it controls how much paint the brush picks up. So if I remove this, it's picking up 25% of the stuff below it for each stroke. You can say, hey, I don't want you to pick up anything, and then it's not going to. It will clear itself out. Or you can say, hey, I want you to pick up 100% of the color that you go over top of. And until it wears itself out and goes back to this gray color, it will keep picking up every bit that it can. Load is how much of the paint is loaded in the reservoir. So right now it's set to 100%. I'm going to turn that off. Let's pick a actual color. Oh, and I don't want that. I'm going to set that back to 25%. So it's only going to use that color for a period until it runs out. Oh, except I have the thing. There we go. Why is that not working? Normally it goes back to my transparent color, and I'm surprised it's not doing that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so apparently the trick is to set wet to 100%. And then that clears out or tells you how quickly you're going to run out of your color. So per stroke I want, we'll say 66% load. So this color should show up 66% of the time. And then mix is just, it's not how these two mix, it's how your paint color mixes with the color below it. So if I want it to be a 50-50, I'm just going to tell it to always load back to this. So it's going to try to mix everything in my brush and everything below it at a 50%. Until it 13. So it's only going to mix 13%. Drag it back up to 90. You can see it's showing 90% of the background through instead. Then you've also got your flow. So that's how much it fades out. So you can get some nice shading going along if you like. Shading's more your thing. I would recommend using the normal brush to lay down your flat base first. I'm not entirely sure how it's different in GIMP or Psy, so I might have to look into that. Possibly put it up on my website. But you can see where I put pencil shading here, so I can mix that in, or put shading strokes, I should say. Start to fade that out. If I make my brush bigger, start pulling it a little bit farther. And I know Procreate has something similar. And then I can actually take my line art, drag it over top, even start doing more layers of it. I've got more options. As you can see, though, it sometimes starts doing some funny business. One of the tools that's very similar to it is the smudge tool. I'm not going to get into that because my Mac and my stream quite hate that. I'll do a little bit. So that it's kind of the same idea. Oops, except I'm not on a layer that I can smudge. There we go. So again, you have your stack and your stack layers and your strength. You can see I have it obviously a little bit too strong. I'm actually surprised that's not freaking out. My file size must be just small enough. But that's just taking the lines that are there and it's moving them around and blurring them out because I have a soft brush. I can turn the strength down to, actually 6 is probably too low. And then you've got your burn and your dodge tool. No, that's a blur tool. Where's my burn and dodge? I actually don't see them. Wonder if Photoshop removed it. Okay, so Photoshop must have just put them in with the brush settings. They used to be their own separate setting instead of having a brush and going to color burn, color dodge. It's the same idea as that. Blur tool is kind of like the smudge, except it just blurs out your lines. It doesn't move them around. So if you have stuff that's out of focus, you can blur them out. And sponge soaks up your color. So I don't have color. Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. I don't have color in here, so it's not going to show up. Let me just throw down a bright color. Now if I take my sponge, it's going to start sucking the color out of it. So there's your basic brushes in a nutshell. And I am going to take 5-10 minutes, have a walk around, get some water. Everyone should get some water. And then we are going to go into making our own brushes, because it's actually easier than it sounds. And we're going to do a light speckle brush, so maybe do some stars. We'll do a hairbrush, and then we might do like a chain brush for a necklace or something to that effect. And I'll write that here, making brushes. Be back in a couple minutes. And we're back. So now we're going to go into making our own brushes, the fun stuff. And I actually should have left that file open, but that's okay. We can open it back up. So there's a couple different ways you can make brushes. We're going to start on our light speckle brush. And we're just actually going to edit our brushes to make them what we want. So we're just going to be working with our normal soft round. Now we're going to get it using our settings to what we want it to be. So first things first, for all of our speckling, we want to scatter it out a little bit. You can choose your count. Now because I'm seeing it's very clustered together, I'm going to pull my spacing a little bit. And we can give it a test, see how that looks. Let's throw it on a light color. Actually, we'll throw it on something like blue. Okay, not bad. Gonna crank my flow up a little bit. Da, da, da. Go back to our scattering. Let's scatter it on both axes, get a little bit more random. Then we're gonna change to count jitter. See what a fade looks like. No, don't much like the fade, so we'll turn that back off. So we've got our basic scattering. Blow it out a little bit more. We turn our count down. That way they get light and fluffy as they're going around. Make the spacing a little bit farther. There we go. Like the look of that. Now we're going to put some color dynamics on it. I'm going to throw some purity up there, so that way we're going to start to get a little bit of color variation. And you'll see when you swap colors, it starts to get a little bit more unique. Starting to get some real fairy lights going. Try it in yellow. I see my hue jitters on 5, that's fine. I'm going to turn my brightness jitter up a little bit, see what happens with that. I'm going to turn my saturation jitter off completely because I want it to stay kind of in the color family that I've picked for it. Let's turn up the brightness jitter a little bit more. Nope. Back down to 6. Gives us enough variation. Maybe take the hue saturation down, or the hue jitter down a little bit. Cool. So that's starting to go. Let's mess with the shapes, because right now they're all looking pretty uniform. They're all the same size. Let's start randomizing our size jitter. We'll crank that up to 50. You can see we're starting to get a little bit. Now we can take our minimum diameter, make it a little bit more. Right. I'm actually going to turn my pen control off because it had it set so that way, depending on how hard I pushed, it was changing the sizes. And it's like, going to make the master brush size a little bit bigger, so that way we get, maybe not that big, so we get some variation going. Size jitter down a little bit. And you'll see it's kind of randomizing my brush shape. I don't know if you can see the circle there as I'm moving around. Maybe make that a little bit smaller. Now we're gonna lightly jitter the roundness. Some of them aren't going to be perfectly round. Not quite that high. Lower that a little bit more. There we go. Got a little bit of variation, but not enough that it's in your face. Now when you get your fairy lights to the size that you want it, going to create new brush, call this light spots. Ooh, actually, I'm going to, I can't remember if changing this, if I can save this with it, but we're going to find out. I'm going to put it on color dodge, so it's going to, every time now it overlaps, it's going to start creating more and more color. It's going to overlay that color dodge effect, make things brighter in the middle where it overlays, or overlaps. I'm going to save this as fairy lights. Drag this up to a new folder, and I'll put these on the website available for download. I'm not sure if they'll be uploadable into other programs, but we shall see. Okay, so there's our fairy lights, and they are saved as a brush. So now when I click out of them, I go back to my old brush. Let's see if that actually saved. Yeah, cool. So now every time I click on it, it automatically jumps my color mode to dodge, low 56, and it pulls in all of these settings that I had saved. So you can make it whatever color you want. You can have blues, greens, if I want to edit that a little bit because I'm seeing my colors are doing some weird stuff. Turn that purity down a little bit. There we go. Or closer to 0, I should say. Should still work with all of these colors. Cool. So now that I've edited it, I have to create a new one. Delete the old one. So now you have your new brush saved. And we got our first brush down. The next brush, because we're going to create a custom brush tip, we're going to need to create a new canvas. So we don't want something that's crazy huge. And if you have the option to set your background to transparent or white, I would set it to transparent or white. We're going to say, honestly, 200 pixels is, if you think about it, 200 pixels if we're working at 200 by 200 or 200 dpi, that means every inch is already 200 pixels. So when you size it up, it shouldn't blur out too bad, but if you want to, you can go up to 500. So it's always easier to make things smaller than it is to make things larger. 72 is fine. Doesn't really matter what your pixels per inch are. Doesn't matter what your color is, because we're going to be working in black and white. So I'm just going to go into, I could probably hide all of these for now. I'm going to go into my hard round. I'm going to take my, oh, because it's got, my shape dynamics are locked, so it's trying to override them. Okay, hard round, and I'm just going to go hard round pressure sensitive. Turn my spacing all the way down. And I'm going to create a new layer to work on. So you'll see I actually have some hairbrushes kind of already in here, is what these ones are. And generally, if you think about it, these are going to be what is being drugged down. Each hair is going to be a little bit different in size, and we don't need to go crazy on the amount. But we'll start with something like this. We'll go a little bit thinner on the outside. We'll do that, something like that. So now the way your brush works is when you click and drag this, it's going to show up as this little end bit here. Erase a couple. Mostly I'm just kind of going random because hair is very random. Doesn't necessarily lay straight. They're not all uniform thicknesses either, so okay, so once I've got kind of my base image laid out, I know in GIMP you have to have a transparent background, so this would work out. Oh, I see I've got some see-through stuff. Don't want see-through stuff if I can help it right now. In GIMP, I know you want a transparent background, so you don't want to be working directly on your background layer. You're going to be wanting to work on a new layer with transparency. Photoshop works in alpha, which means white is invisible, black is noticeable. So I'm going to merge this down. Then I can Command A to select my entire image. And somebody might have to let me know either through email or on my website if it's slightly different in Sci or Clip Paint, because I haven't necessarily experimented with those quite as often. And then under Edit, we've got our Define Brush preset. I click that, it's going to tell me, hey, this is your sample, and it gives you a preview, kind of what your brush is going to look like. Sure, I'm just going to call it sampled brush because I haven't edited any of the dynamics yet. And you'll see it shows up right away, doing what all the brushes do, spacing 10%. Go back into here. It's kind of what I was predicting to happen. That's 10% spacing. But now if I turn the spacing off, cool. Starting to get a little bit more hair-like. Well, now we need some shape dynamics, because we want this to be able to fade out. So I'm going to set mine to pen pressure. That way when it gets to the end of the stroke, it should fade out. Maybe I need to set it to fade. There, it's because I've got my bitters doing something funny. Normally it works a lot easier right off the bat for me. Angle jitter, obviously that doesn't do what we want it to do. Quite sure it's because my diameter isn't quite working the way I want it to. As you can see, you can turn it. Oh, roundness. Okay, go back to 100. Oops, and I accidentally transferred out of it, and now it's definitely not going to do what I want it to do. Okay, I see what was going weird. So when I had it at full size, it was not working the way I wanted it to. Kept tucking in the corners. So I shrunk it down a little bit, and this is where that zoom thing comes into play, because when I zoom in, it'll still be noticeable. But zoomed out, it's perfectly fine. Ah haha, yeah, okay. It was being funny. So I changed the size a little bit. Oh, and I just tabbed out of that brush again. Look at me hitting the wrong hotkeys. Control, pen pressure. Shrink it down so there's some bits of it that are still in there. There we go. Now it's starting to look the way that I want it to. All it took was resizing it. Yeah, I forgot when you have it, when you make your brush image at full size, you generally have to shrink it down, otherwise it's going to show some minor imperfections, and then once you shrink it down, it tends to work much, much better. So now that I've got it where I like it, I can hit save. And when I include tool settings is this stuff here, and I'm not going to include tool settings because I don't want the color dodge on there. Just going to capture brush size and preset, so it says 35 because I have it set to 35 pixels. I'm going to name this hair. I'm actually going to change my minimum diameter so it can't get to like that perfect point. You still get some hair strands, but we'll make it not crazy noticeable. Oh, this will start to get your hair bits going. And then just for giggles, we're going to do another one, but we're going to do, oops, that's not what I want. Fill with white. This one I'm just going to do a couple. Oh, color dodge, that's not going to work for me. There we go. I'm going to do some smaller dots, but we're going to spread out to the far corners. Find brush preset, sampled brush 4, sure. And then just like the other one, see our spacing is cranked really high. I'm going to turn that back down. And I'm actually going to rotate this a little bit until they look a little bit more random. There we go. Now, starting to get there. And I want pen pressure turned back on. Oh, look at me go, messing myself up again with with the wrong hotkeys because I was in the Liquify earlier. I'm going to make these super small so they look like super fine. These are going to be your extra hair strands. Now when I save this one, I'm just going to do sample brush 4. I go back into shape dynamics for this brush. Should be able to, no, it's just going to do the dots. Okay, well, that's fine. I can rename it, and we'll call this fine hair strands. So these are going to be your one or two that might stick out. So now we've got this one, this one, and our fairy lights. Just to see it work. And if you want, you can add color dynamics to your hairbrushes. Oh, I must have had color dodge set on this one. Okay, well let me turn that off and then save it. Oh, no, it was because, I know what happened. It's because I had the fairy lights on. So we'll make it so it automatically sets it to a normal mode. There we go. We'll do the same with this guy. We'll have it include tool settings so it automatically sets it to normal. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to make this one's background white again. Now we're going to get into a little bit of fun stuff. So when you're making a chain brush, you're going to, oh, I'm not working in black. That's going to be a problem. You're going to have the points that it attaches to itself. I'm going to try to make this as centered as possible. Oh, no. So I should work on a new layer. Of course, it depends on if your chain is going to be machine made or man made. Depends on how perfectly even it will be. I'm going to duplicate the layer to kind of see where they're going to connect. This is where we've got to do some a little bit of inventive drawing right now. So if this is where that one's going to connect, we're going to put a white highlight here, and then when we drag it, it's going to stamp a next brush, which will cover up that white highlight. Let's see where that one connects at the bottom. And I'm going to angle this just a little bit since it's not quite center. Now when it's got a white, that's going to be transparent. It's not going to be a color. It's not going to cover it up with white, unfortunately. So we just got to keep that in mind while we're making this, and I'm okay with that kind of coming off. Oops. I want this one. Give me my hard round pressure. I'm trying to stick to using brushes that Photoshop comes with for this. Then I'm going to zoom way out so I kind of can see what it's going to look like. The actual links themselves can be a little bit bigger, a little bit more heavy duty. I'm kind of stylizing this one, a little more comic-y feel to it. And highlight a little bit closer up there. Assume that the light's coming in this way. Then if I was smart, I would have used the symmetry tool. But let's go like this, that, highlight back. Cool, that looks good enough for me. So now I'm gonna, if you don't want to completely lose your layer, you can, because if you're not sure it's going to work, you can duplicate it, hide one, and as long as, for Photoshop, you have it on the black and white, select your entire thing, and define brush preset. So now, of course, it decides it doesn't want to add spacing, but we definitely want it to have spacing because we need our chains to connect. And sometimes what this angle shows isn't going to be accurate to how you draw it. So it takes a little bit of testing. I'm going to shrink this way down. Cool, so if I go straight, and if you hold shift, you'll draw in a straight line. So if I hold shift, that looks pretty good. My spacing looks perfectly fine. Now the one thing I want is angle, but I want this to, like I want it to follow the direction, because that doesn't look very natural. So this one we're going to say, hey, I want you to rotate with whatever direction I'm facing. Now you're going to see that obviously made how they connect not work. So we need to go back up into our tip dynamics, and this is where we kind of got to figure out what our angle is, because sometimes it's not what it shows. There we go. So that's looking a little bit better. Then you can go through and erase your one end. And shouldn't have adjusted that. I want that to stay at 100. Now, the one thing I do not want is my opacity getting too low, because then it's going to start giving me oddness here. So, opacity is going to be off. Low is going to be up at 100%. We'll do it by pen pressure, but we'll make it a pretty high minimum. So it's still make it darker. Or a little bit lighter if you want them coming out of. Or to be kind of faded out. Now we can have blue chain. Have a green one. You can have gold if you want. You can tweak your color dynamics if you so choose. Have each of your links be slightly different. Actually, let's do that. Let's turn this down to 0. But we're going to jiggle with our brightness jitter. Let's put that back to black. Oh, but now I see some funky business right there. Okay, never mind. We are not going to mess around with that. But we do have a working chain brush that will follow your brush wherever it happens to go. Make necklace. You'd have to do a little bit of tweaking, but it's a good start. Earrings. Going to tweak my spacing just a little bit. Wrong direction, because I want them to look like they're hanging off of each other. Metal doesn't exactly bend, and when it's pulled tight, it doesn't leave space between them. So I want it to eat up that highlight. There we go. That looks good. Cool, so now we have our chain brush. So now you kind of know how to make a brush for every occasion that you ever need. And do we got any questions? For anyone who wants a specific brush? Might have a little bit of time to throw one in there. Nope, no questions, no brush. Tiger's just, nope. Wait until your brain demelts from the influx of information, and then I'll probably get messages. Is that that's how it normally goes, right? Okay, well, if that's it, that's all. In April, there's going to be an introduction to, or shapes and shading course. Um, yeah, very much after solidifying again. Shapes and shading course starting in April. Let me just double check what day that is, because I don't even remember what day it is today half the time, so. And where did I stick my calendar? There it is. So April 3rd, I think, is when, yeah, April 3rd is when we're going to start the 4-part into shapes and shading. My email is on my website, so if anyone's got any ideas or things that they specifically want to know that might be included in that, feel free to shoot me an email. And then by Sunday, this video should be up on the website as well for anyone who wants it, along with these fancy little brushes that we made today. And if that's it, I will see everyone in April. Have a good night.